that theme music.
Have you ever looked at someone and the sight of them alone makes you physically ill? Yeah, that's me with Mike Johnson through and through. Yes, our House Speaker, Mike Johnson. I am a D1 hater, and I will explain why. This may turn into a series of unfortunate events, really, but I really want to talk today about his bizarre adoption situation. And there's one thing that everyone needs to understand about Mike Johnson. He is someone who has misconstrued the teachings of the Bible to fit his narrative for nationalism in the United States. He is an extremist who cloaks himself behind the cross and says that he does everything he does for the hope of creating a nation that loves the Lord. And it's just very manipulative. So everyone just needs to understand, like, that is where his mindset is, and it's something that we'll talk more about later, not in this video. So let's get into this adoption situation. So in 1997, Mike Johnson was around 25 years old when he met a 13-year-old child who was Black in his church youth group named Michael James. According to Mike Johnson, he brought Michael in under his wing at the age of 13 because Michael was headed down a dangerous path. In 1999, Mike Johnson and his wife entered in what is called a covenant marriage, which I think is only something that happens in like Arkansas, Louisiana, and one other state. It just makes it more difficult to get divorced. But after entering that covenant marriage, they invited Michael to come live with them in their home. It's unclear if Michael lived with Mike Johnson before he married his wife or if Michael came to live with them after they got married. Not sure. After Mike Johnson and his wife invited Michael to come live with them, they did start calling Michael their son, but they did not ever go through any kind of adoption process. According to the hero in his own mind, Mike Johnson, him intervening in Michael's life is what saved him from a early passing, street violence, and substance use, which is a very bold pat on the back, one might say, especially because starting in 2003, Michael did begin to collect a bit of a legal rap sheet, facing charges for weapons, for possession and distribution of substances, trespassing, etc. Michael also faced charges in his mid to late 20s after he violated a restraining order that was placed against him by the parents of a 16-year-old girl whom he was engaged in a physical relationship with. So here's a little bit more information about that alleged inappropriate relationship that Michael engaged in that he got in trouble for. So basically, he was picking this 16-year-old child up from school that he had met online. He himself was in his mid to late 20s, and the father was not happy about this. Michael would proceed to threaten to take her father's life if he did not allow Michael to continue to engage with his child. And what's really strange about this entirety of this relationship is how when Mike Johnson began running for Congress about 10 years ago now, he exploited his children to help secure his votes.
Mike's got 4 really good reasons for running for Congress.
Number 1, he wants government to stop wasting money.
Number 2, protect us from terrorists crossing the border.
3, honor our founding fathers and the Constitution.
And 4, he wants us to have a better future.
That's what it's all about. I'm Mike Johnson, and I approve this ad because it's time for an American revival.
In the exploitation of his children to help secure the votes to, appear like this great family man, Michael was never mentioned. This son, who Mike Johnson claims to have helped raise, never gets mentioned in any of these campaigns.
My dad believes in what's best for America and Louisiana. He says in this country we stand for freedom, our police, our military, and better health care for everybody. People tell me all the time how much they love and appreciate my dad. I say thanks, because I do too.
I'm Congressman Mike Johnson, and I approve this message.
In fact, throughout his entire career in politics, Mike Johnson has always stated that he has 4 children. And as you can see, none of those children are Michael. In fact, we the people didn't really even know about Michael's existence until around 2019, years after he had been elected into Congress. Michael was not even mentioned, really, until reparations were being talked about on the House floor.
Many of my colleagues in this committee may not be aware that in addition to our 4 children still at home, my wife Kelly and I actually have a much older son who happens to be African American. We took custody of Michael and made him part of our family 22 years ago when we were just newlyweds, and Michael was just 14 and out on the streets, nowhere to go and on a very dangerous path. Michael's grown now, he has his own young family, he turns 36 years old next week, and he's a loving dad to 4 precious children of his own. God's been good to us and he's a success story. I mention that today for one reason. I personally know the challenge that he has faced early in his life. I have walked with him through discrimination that he's had to endure over the years and the hurdles he's sometimes faced. I know all this, but I was with him. I asked Michael this weekend what he thinks about the idea of reparations. In a very thoughtful way, he explained his opposition. And
Mike Johnson invoked his black son to use as a mouthpiece as to why the black community does not need or want reparations. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what we call tokenization. That is the textbook example of tokenization. He blatantly tokenized Michael, who he claims to have raised, to encourage the United States of America to continue to not uphold promises that were made to our ancestors. Then we really didn't hear about Michael again until Matt Gaetz got into an emotional screaming match on the House committee floor.
Are you suggesting that you're certain that none of us have non-white children? Because you reflected on your black son and you said none of us could understand.
Matt, stop. I'm not about to get sidetracked about the color of our children. We're talking about black kids. I reclaimed my time.
You said that.
I reclaimed my time. I know.
You want the discussion?
I know that
gentleman reclaimed his time.
Because we know that Matt Gaetz also had a adopted son named Nestor, who was never his son, but his ex-girlfriend's little brother. You know, that Matt Gaetz kept really close to him to ensure that he could secure younger girls. But isn't it so interesting how neither Nestor nor Michael really have become a part of discussion unless they are being used as a mouthpiece to further either Mike Johnson or Matt Gaetz' political agendas. And I find it very ironic and hypocritical because Mike Johnson has made public statements stating that because he raised a black child, he understands the plight and the struggle that the black community goes through on a day-to-day basis. But in reality, we know from his voting record and his rhetoric that Mike Johnson, throughout his entire political career, has gone above and beyond to hinder progress in the black community. Mike Johnson is a huge supporter and an apologist for the only administration since the passing of the Civil Rights Act that has tried to walk back equality. In present day, Mike Johnson is in his 50s and Michael is in his 40s, just further showing the very strange age difference between father and son. I will never agree with only talking about your adopted child when you want to tokenize them. While of course we don't have any kind of access to the Speaker of the House and his wife's will, we do have access to the obituary of Mike Johnson's father who passed away, and Michael was not listed as one of his grandchildren. Okay, so Mike Johnson's father passed away in 2016, and in his obituary, all of the living grandchildren, children, etc. were mentioned. Michael's name it doesn't exist in his obituary at all. And we remember that Michael was not even mentioned to anyone, Congress, the public, anyone, until 2019 when Mike Johnson needed someone to tokenize so that he could vote against reparations. So that just kind of further proves my point on how Mike Johnson has quite literally used Michael to push his own political agenda. You know, you would think that if you took this child in as newlyweds and raised him to save him from going down a bad path, you would think that your father might also recognize him as a part of the family, but I guess not. Mike Johnson is so obsessed with the nuclear family and covenant marriage, yet he doesn't even live at home with his wife and kids and has not for a while. What's the problem, Mike? Trouble at home? I know those covenant marriage laws, they're very tricky and they do require you to live apart from your spouse for a total of 2 years before you can file for divorce, but I'm sure that's not what's going on. I'm sure there's no trouble in paradise. I know Mike Johnson's tiny hands and non-existent backbone make his wife feel very safe and secure in all aspects of their relationship. But on a serious note, Mike Johnson's living situation is bizarre and needs to be talked about. So since at least December of 2024, Mike Johnson has been living with a pastor named Steve Berger. And Steve Berger's mission since 2021 has been to be a minister to Congress to help turn their belief system into legislation. Steve Berger and his wife, Sarah Berger, operate their congressional ministry in a townhouse that is about 2 blocks away from the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. And this ministry is called Ambassador Services International, and it is inside of this organization's townhouse where Mike Johnson is currently living. But there's some lore to this townhouse and the actual owner of it. So this is said townhouse. This is its proximity from the United States Capitol, so it's very close. But this townhouse that Mike Johnson is living in with this pastor and his wife is not just any townhouse in Washington, D.C. It is formerly Frederick Douglass's original home. Frederick Douglass's home was bought by the Smithsonian and turned into a subsect of the African American Museum of Art. But in 2021, a major Red Party donor who is affiliated with the Heritage Foundation purchased the Smithsonian Museum of African American Art, Frederick Douglass's former home, renovated it, and turned it into a swanky congressional townhouse where this pastor could operate out of. The sole listed owner of this townhouse that Mike Johnson is currently living in is a man named Lee Beeman. On top of being a part of the Heritage Foundation and this Ambassador Services International organization, he is also a major Trump donor. And during his divorce from his fourth wife back in 2018, he was accused of some really horrendous things. The owner of the home Mike Johnson is living in was accused of forcing his wife at the time to watch training videos, which were videos of him engaging in physical acts with workers of a certain nature. He was also accused of forcing his wife to engage in group physical activities with him, her, and someone who they would pay. His fourth ex-wife also said that he was so addicted to watching adult content that he would even watch it in the living room, surrounded by family members, even his minor son. The fact that such a disgusting man owns Frederick Douglass's home is so incredibly disappointing, but at the same time, I know the ancestors are gonna deal with y'all, and that brings me a little bit of peace. So Steve and Sarah Berger live in this townhouse full-time that is owned by Lee Beeman, and they operate their congressional ministry out of this townhouse, and it's very common for them to invite members of Congress to live with them in this townhouse to be able to work with them and mentor them directly. Like I said, Mike Johnson has been living with this couple since at least December of 2024. And before that, last year, former North Carolina Congressman Dan Bishop, who was the congressman who brought forward the very controversial anti-trans bathroom bill, he also lived in this home with Sarah and Stephen Berger. He was still a member of Congress. I believe his term has ended now, but while he was still in Congress, he was also living with this couple. I did a little bit of listening and reading and looking into kind of like what the main frame of Sarah and Stephen's belief system is, so that I could better understand what they are feeding into the minds of our Congress. In a nutshell, they are a textbook example of accelerationists. They believe that the United States needs to be a Christian nation because the coming of Christ is going to occur after one more massive world conflict. And during this time, everyone who believes exactly what they believe and buys into their belief system, they will be saved from an eternity in hell. That's the gist. Jumbled up in that mess is a hatred for the World Health Organization, believing they are operating a satanic plot. Conspiracy theories, believing that members of the LGBTQ community are demonic, etc., etc. Like I said, Mike Johnson has been living here since at least December of 2024, and it's really very peculiar because Mike Johnson was reported after he was placed into the position of House Speaker, he was sleeping in his office. Very peculiar. Look, I don't know what the heck is going on, but I'm getting real sick and tired of how these folks are screaming at us about the nuclear family, but they are leaving their wife and kids to shack up with other couples. Like, stop listening to the Fresh and Fit podcast and come back to reality. Like, you guys are so painfully hypocritical. No, we're we're not done. I've pitched a tent on Mike Johnson's neck, and I will be living here for the foreseeable future. You know what I think? I think Mike Johnson hates the idea of reparations so much because he had not only one, not only two, but 3 sets of ancestors who owned our people. Yes, yes, not your family running plantations and owning our people, but the idea of reparations is unfeasible. If you look at Mike Johnson's genealogy, not shocking that his ancestors owned us. Not shocking at all. This is like the colonizer blueprint. So in 1830, Mike Johnson's great-grandfather to like the 5th power, his great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, owned 10 of our people. And that forefather of Mike Johnson was named Cyprian Rachel. And that great-great-great-great-grandfather, Cyprian, would go on to have a son, Mike Johnson's great-great-great-great-grandfather, great-grandfather to the 4th power. His name was Onhair, and he owned 14 of our people in Louisiana in 1860. The 1860 census notated that amongst these 14 people who were owned by Mike Johnson's great-great-great-great-grandfather, 2 of them were a set of 1-year-old baby girls. And that part is especially spooky to me because it was very rare for a black woman to live through childbirth at that time, let alone a twin childbirth. So to see that there were a set of 1-year-old girls is just even more disturbing and leaves so many questions. Census records also show that a few houses down the road from Mike Johnson's great-grandfather to the 4th power, Onhair, who we were just talking about, who owned the 1-year-old little girls, lived another forefather of Mike Johnson named Amadi Rochelle. And Amadi owned 4 of our people. And Amadi and Onhair were both great-great-great-great-grandfathers of Mike Johnson, great-grandfathers to the 4th power of Mike Johnson, because Onhair and Amadi's children would marry one another, and then a few generations down the line, Mike Johnson would come along. The thing is, I'm not sitting here beefing because of something his ancestors did. I'm sitting here beefing because his ancestors not only did that, it's the fact that Mike Johnson has chosen, after being elected into a position of power, knowing his own ancestry, that he has taken leaps and bounds to bring us backwards. He is a part of the administration that quite literally made segregation legal in federal establishments again. It is 2025. And I can be fair. Listen, I can be fair and level-headed. There are many people in our Congress who are lawmakers who have ancestral ties to that terrible time in history where people like us were not seen as human. There's over 100. Off the top of my head, Amy Coney Barrett, Mitch McConnell, their families both have ties to that terrible time in history where we were owned. Joseph Robinette Biden, Obama on his mother's side. It's not the fact that it's a part of the history, it's about what you're doing about it now that you have power and influence in law. That's what matters, because if you have that a part of your history and you take steps to take us back to that history, we're beefing.